On tomorrow's Vanessa Show, we meet the woman obsessed with keeping an all-year-round tan, despite a skin cancer scare, and her best friends who'll beg her to stop, plus TV boys in blue, Billy Murray and Ashford on the new look to TV's The Bill, and another Vanessa Show viewer gets their shot at superstardom in A Star Is Born. All that and more Tuesday morning, 9:45, BBC One.
With lace making, lino cutting and reupholstery, the Arts and Crafts Hour begins on BBC Two in 10 minutes.
Lady's had a bag stolen. I'm a locksmith. Can you explain to me what I'm meant to do, please? Tell her I can't park here, we can't let you in.
Struggles we know.
I'm absolutely broke and I'm not really bothered because it's something I wanted so much.
Dreams we have.
When you want something so much, you just like, you play with fire a bit to get it, don't you?
Fears we share.
I'm the boss. Sweeping up, and I'm the boss. Someone's got to do it and it's got to be me. You know, sometimes I look at it and I think, is it worth it?
Join the people of Paddington Green tonight at 9:30 on BBC One.
The finest smell in the world, fish. Sniff it up your nostril, you can't beat it.
Get the taste for a fishy world.
Billingsgate's my life. Oh, I love the market.
What do they weigh, Joe? Well, don't keep throwing them on.
With you, you sleep it, you eat it, you drink it.
It's even your lucky day because I'm going to do your deals on it. It's beautiful, isn't it? It is lovely. That's a lovely bit of fish.
It's like something like how London used to be. I look at this.
Fish Tales, the first in a new series of Inside Story. Wednesday at 10:15 on BBC One.
This is BBC One, now the 1 o'clock news with Justin Webb.
Serb forces advance in Kosovo in defiance of warnings from NATO. Good afternoon. As the crisis in Kosovo worsens, the Foreign Secretary is to make a statement to the Commons demanding that Serb war criminals are brought to trial. The other headlines: Jeff and Jennifer Bramley will hear today whether they can go on looking after their foster children while their long-term future is decided. Passions raised again as the law lords hold their second hearing into the case of General Pinochet. And calls for the elderly to be treated with more dignity in hospital. International peace monitors say more fighting has broken out in the Serbian province of Kosovo. Serb forces opened fire in the village of Račak with mortars and automatic weapons. More than 40 ethnic Albanians were massacred in the village on Friday. NATO is sending its two most senior military officers to Belgrade to confront President Milosevic about the killings. And the International War Crimes Prosecutor, Louise Arbour, is trying to enter Kosovo from Macedonia to investigate the incident, although it's just been reported that she's been turned back at the border. In Britain, the Foreign Secretary will make a statement in the Commons calling for those responsible for the most recent massacre to face a war crimes trial.
Serbs have continued to fire into Račak this morning, although the people who live there have mostly fled. Their aim can only be to intimidate the international observers, while Serb police move into the region to destroy damaging evidence of the massacre.
We don't know how many people are in there. This seems to be part of an ongoing operation. It just seems to be that this is a plan to systematically go from one village to another.
Before the bodies are even buried, events are moving quickly on the diplomatic front. The first reaction of the international community to the massacre was to call for those responsible to face war crimes trials. And the chief prosecutor from The Hague, Louise Arbour, is on her way. She says senior politicians will have no immunity from her charges. That's why they'll try to stop her getting into Kosovo. But at the same time as pressing for trials, the West is now looking seriously again at bombing the Serbs. After evidence of Serb massacres of civilians was uncovered by the BBC in September, NATO threatened air raids. They were only called off at the 11th hour, when the Serbs withdrew their forces and accepted the presence of international experts to verify the ceasefire. The Serbs' violation of that agreement and the new massacre is a direct challenge to NATO's credibility, provoking the military alliance to act. The big problem, though, is what to do next. The West does not want Kosovo to become independent, although that's the only thing acceptable to the rebel Kosovo Liberation Army, whose renewed strength has provoked the Serb attacks. NATO is impatient with the KLA, who have broken the ceasefire too. But for now, after the Račak massacre, It is these Serb and Yugoslav army forces who they want to stop. David Loyne, BBC News.
And within the last few minutes, we've heard that the European Union has made a formal protest to the Yugoslav government about what is going on in Kosovo. A short while ago, I spoke to the NATO Secretary-General, Javier Solana, and I asked him what message NATO is sending to Mr. Milosevic.
Well, the message, I think, is very clear. Message first is that Milosevic has to comply with the agreement that he signed with NATO in October. Second, that he has to give the support to the International Tribunal in order to finalize the investigation of the massacre of the other day. And third, that he has to continue to give a real support to the OEC verifiers which are on the ground deployed.
But isn't it a fact that he is not doing any of those things? And even this morning, Serb forces are apparently advancing around the village where they massacred people so recently. None of those things are happening.
But that's why the military commanders are going there to very clearly impress Milosevic and, on these at least 3 points, and to tell him that otherwise he'll have to face responsibilities of another nature by NATO.
What will happen if he doesn't take any notice of the warnings he gets today?
Well, I'm not going to spell out what may happen, but there's no question that the international community, including NATO, will take a good note of that and will act appropriately.
But isn't it a fact that Mr. Milosevic will believe, and indeed many people will believe, that actually NATO will do nothing?
Well, I don't know why Mr. Milosevic has to know that. But let me very clearly state that NATO is the organization that brought peace to Bosnia. NATO is the organization that stopped a catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe, not long ago by using their force or by threatening the use of force. It will continue to be a credible organization, and Milosevic better believe that.
Yes, but surely it can only be a credible organization in Kosovo once force is used.
Well, as you know very well, we threatened with the use of force. We are prepared to use it, and that is stop a humanitarian catastrophe. The use of force is a last resort, and we will be prepared to use it as a last resort.
But we've seen so many threats of force. We now have a situation where Serb forces have actually massacred civilians. There is absolute and plain contravention of all the agreements that were made in the past, and yet still those threats of force are not translated into anything else.
Today, the commanders of NATO will go to talk to President Milosevic to impress him that he does not behave according to what has been agreed, that he may have to face other action by NATO. But that is the last resort. I mean, the use of force is the last resort that the international community has.
Mr. Solana, thank you very much. Jeff and Jenny Bramley will find out this afternoon whether they can carry on looking after their foster daughters while their application to adopt them is decided by the courts. The couple, who returned home on Saturday after 4 months in hiding, said they came back because social services agreed to allow them a court hearing on the fate of the girls, 5-year-old Hannah and 3-year-old Jade. Joining me now from outside the High Court in London is our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt. Alison, what actually happens this afternoon?
Well, this afternoon is the first round, if you like, in what is going to be a very lengthy legal battle. The lawyers representing the Bramleys and representing Cambridgeshire Social Services will turn up here at the High Court in about half an hour's time. They will present their opening arguments to Mrs. Justice Hogg, the judge who is going to be presiding over this, and what she has to decide is whether or not the 2 little girls involved can stay with the Bramleys until the legal wranglings about their adoption are sorted out.
Now, there's huge publicity surrounding this case. There wouldn't be normally, of course. Is there anything the judge might try to do to prevent publicity going on?
This is an extremely unusual case. Generally speaking, when you have this sort of case, this adoption case, before the High Court, everything would be behind closed doors. You wouldn't be able to publish the names of the children involved or the parents involved. Well, because the Bramleys spent 17 weeks on the run, therefore the children's names were published. They're in the public domain. Now, it may be that the judge decides now is the time to try and bring things back behind closed doors so that some decisions can be made about the girls' future. And therefore, it may be that there are restrictions increased on the reporting of the case.
Do we know actually whether the Bramleys are going to be there this afternoon?
We don't at the moment. We know that their lawyer is going to be there, their solicitor is going to be there, along with barristers representing them. As to whether or not the couple will be here in person, we're going to find that out shortly.
And then this is the short-term decision, and then at some point in the future there will be a long-term decision, and at that case the council will actually oppose, will they, the rights of the Bramleys to keep these children?
That's right. Cambridgeshire Social Services are adamant that the Bramleys are not the right family for Jade and Hannah. They say they don't want the adoption to go ahead. The worries that they had before the Bramleys ran away remain, and those are the things which are going to be discussed in the courts. Now, the Bramleys have said all along they didn't feel that their views got a fair hearing in the initial decision to take the girls away from them. They're obviously hoping that the court will give them that fair hearing.
Alison Holt, thank you very much. 7 law lords have begun a second hearing into whether the former Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet should be given immunity from arrest and extradition. The general's lawyers are resisting an attempt to extradite him to Spain, arguing that as a former head of state he can't be tried for alleged crimes committed when he was in power. The law lords' original decision was set aside after it was revealed that one of the judges had links to Amnesty International.
A new year, a new hearing at the House of Lords, and a new attempt by General Pinochet's political opponents to pour scorn on the former dictator. On the other side of the road, and on the other side of the argument, the general's supporters were also out in force. Making his first appearance at court, Baltasar Garzón, the Spanish judge who wants General Pinochet extradited to stand trial in Spain on charges of torture and hostage-taking. His counsel, Alan Jones QC, with him here on the left, was highly critical of arguments lodged by the Chilean government last week. Chile's lawyers say the English courts have no jurisdiction in the case. They argue the only courts which can judge General Pinochet are the courts of his own country. Alan Jones QC, representing Judge Garzón and the Spanish government, said it was not for the 7 law lords to consider whether these proceedings were a matter for Chile or whether they would affect the political balance in that country. He said General Pinochet was charged with torture, which was absolutely forbidden under international conventions. Mr. Jones said that nobody accused of torture can say, "I tortured for the greater good. I tortured in the course of saving the economy. I tortured only to the minimum extent necessary." You can't even say, "I tortured to discover the whereabouts of a terrorist bomb." Still less can you say, "I tortured, but I assisted the United Kingdom during the Falklands War." For this last remark, Mr. Jones received a mild rebuke from Lord Brown-Wilkinson. This morning, the human suffering behind these legal charges was vividly described by the son of a man who was tortured and killed after General Pinochet came to power.
His jawbone had been crushed. His breastbone had been staved in. Both collarbones had been knocked off. All 22 ribs had been broken.
These demonstrators argue that as a matter of law, a former head of state has total immunity from prosecution and extradition. But to those whose family were murdered or disappeared, there are broader moral issues at stake. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News at the House of Lords.
Well, Sol Letelier from the pro-Pinochet Chilean Reconciliation Movement and the Chilean exile Vicente Alegre, who is from the anti-Pinochet campaign, join me now, both of them at Westminster. Sol Letelier, what is the argument? Set out for us once again the arguments why General Pinochet should be allowed to go home.
Well, you know, I'm a Chilean woman. I have traveled thousands of miles, of kilometers to be here today, and I represent the reconciliation of my country. We don't want Europeans or anyone in the world interfere with our peace process. We want and we need Senator Pinochet back in Chile so we continue with our lives.
Vicente Alegre, what is your answer to those points?
Well, first, we are Chilean as well. We don't believe that it's possible to have a reconciliation in Chile without justice, without truth. The point is that there has to be, there cannot be impunity, and peace and democracy be built on that. It's not a point of that we don't want reconciliation. We want reconciliation, we want peace, we want democracy in Chile, but on the base of justice.
Mr. Alegre, are you worried? The Chilean government, of course, is being allowed to put its case before the law lords. It wasn't given that opportunity last time, or didn't ask for it. Are you worried that this time the case is not going to go your way?
No, not necessarily. We don't believe that is going to be the case. The fact that the law lords set aside the decision in the first place was to say, if you want, the credibilities of the House of Lords, so there could be no excuse from the side of the General Pinochet to say that there is partiality. A different thing totally different is that they are going to accept that General Pinochet can have immunity from prosecution because he was head of the state when those crimes were committed. There were no normal acts of government, torture, to disappear, to kill, to commit an act of international terrorism.
OK, let me put this point then to Sol Letellier. How confident are you this time that the arguments will go in your favour?
You know that the last poll made in Chile said that 70%, 75% of Chilean people want Pinochet back in Chile. That is a real, we are very confident that he will be back, and all the world understand that's our problem and everything must be done in Chile, because with recrimination it's against reconciliation and we want reconciliation. That's what I have to say.
Sol Letellier and Vicente Alegre, thank you both very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Lucille McLaughlin, the nurse who spent 17 months in a Saudi Arabian prison for the murder of a colleague, has been sentenced to 240 hours community service for theft and fraud. She had been found guilty at an earlier hearing of stealing money from an elderly patient at Dundee Hospital and using a stolen bank card.
Lucille McLaughlin arrived at court to face sentence after being convicted of forging the employment references which helped her get her job in Saudi Arabia, and for the theft of £300. The 33-year-old nurse was filmed on a bank security camera withdrawing the money from an automatic cash dispenser using a card belonging to an elderly woman patient. It was evidence which bore a striking similarity to footage the Saudis claimed they had during the nurse's trial for the murder of Yvonne Guilford. The court heard that Lucille had travelled to Saudi Arabia to try to escape punishment for the theft in March 1996, but she now accepted her guilt. Sheriff Alistair Stewart sentenced her to 240 hours community service as an alternative to prison, which he said he had considered.
The sheriff told Lucille McLaughlin she'd been guilty of a very serious offence involving a gross breach of trust and had then embarked upon a journey to Saudi Arabia which had had the most unfortunate personal consequences. However, sending you to prison, he said, would not achieve anything and would not do you or society any good.
Since returning from Saudi Arabia after 17 months in jail for being an accessory to murder, Lucille McLaughlin has set up home in Dundee. She is now married and has written a book about her experiences. She has also made money, though not a fortune, says her lawyer, from selling her story to a Scottish tabloid newspaper. Today, relatives of the 79-year-old woman whose bank account was raided by Lucille left the court without comment, but they were clearly upset. Lucille's lawyer, however, said she'd suffered enough. Her fall from grace had been complete and her career as a nurse lay in ruins.
This lady is looking at a very sad vista of her life. I hope that she does redeem herself. She led a useful life before and she made an error and she's paid a terrible price for it.
Lucille left without speaking to face an uncertain future. She's unemployed and is likely to be removed from the nursing register. Andrew Castle, BBC News, Dundee.
The time is 16 minutes past 1. Still to come in the programme. A campaign to bring more dignity to elderly hospital patients. And a community overshadowed by political protest. Elderly hospital patients are claiming that they're not treated with respect by doctors and nurses. In a survey carried out by the charity Help the Aged, many older patients said that on overstretched wards, their needs were often ignored. The charity has begun a campaign to improve hospital care of the elderly.
The Central Middlesex Hospital in West London has been commended for the way it specifically targets the needs of elderly patients. But nationally, Help the Aged say some experience shocking levels of ill treatment. Concerns include delays in admission, dirty wards, overworked staff, poor food and inadequate care.
Lack of dignity is being in bed in soiled pyjamas and nightdress because there's no one who's got time to change it and you've got no one who will wash it for you. Unkempt because there's no one who will brush your hair or give you a shave. Smelling less than attractive because there's no one who will wash you properly. Those things make you feel dreadful.
Gillian Rooney was appalled by the treatment her 89-year-old father, Herbert, received in a Kent hospital. She says he was incontinent and left in urine-soaked sheets. The ward was filthy and staff were uncaring.
The whole thing was just utter neglect and a feeling of sort of depression and hopelessness, and I'd never seen my father so depressed. And he actually said to me if I had a gun I'd shoot myself, and it was unbearable. And he said he'd asked for an extra blanket because he was cold and he'd just been told they were busy and, dismissed.
Help the Aged claims elderly patients get worse treatment than any other group in the NHS. Those caring for the elderly say the majority of patients have a positive experience in hospital, but accept problems can occur.
It starts with the admission to hospital and perhaps an unduly long wait in casualty before a bed is found. While they're in hospital, some patients complain that the wards they're in are not clean enough, they complain that they're tatty, others complain that they aren't receiving sufficient help with food.
Later this year, the government will publish the first national standards for care of the elderly in hospital. Help the Aged say improving dignity on the wards need not cost a fortune. Much of it is about simply treating older people with respect. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Central London.
And Dr. Simon Festing is coordinating Help the Aged's campaign. He joins me now from our Central London studio. Dr. Festing, it is about respect, but it sounds from some of the examples we were hearing there as if it is also about a real case of neglect.
That's right. Help the Aged is very concerned that so many older people get poor treatment on the NHS. Many older people are not treated with respect, and because the ward staff are so rushed, the nurses are so busy, older people are sometimes not even getting the basic care.
We heard one story there of how someone was plainly not given anything like basic care. Are you saying that that is commonplace?
It's widespread enough of a problem to need serious attention. Many older people are complaining of not being given the basic care, help with eating, feeding and washing. That is clearly unacceptable.
Now, why is it happening?
Well, Help the Aged has found that the older people are simply not a priority for the NHS. And now we're calling on the government to set these standards of care across the whole country and make sure that hospital managers do have systems to deal with and recognise the needs of older people.
When you're saying they're not a priority for the NHS, I mean, we're talking presumably about busy wards where nurses have an awful lot to do or under a lot of pressure, and you're saying that elderly people are, if you like, the last people that they think about.
Older people are really at the bottom of the pile. The NHS is very much geared up towards the glamorous high technology treatment, and we're finding that the older people are simply not getting the basic nursing care and the specific attention that they need.
Now, one obvious answer to that is provide more nurses.
Well, Help the Aged wants to see the government ensure that there are sufficient trained staff on the wards to deliver care with respect and with dignity. That's not the whole solution. We need hospital management to look at the issue as well and make sure they have systems in place. And Help the Aged will also be working with the staff on the wards. We know that we have the support of the Royal College of Nursing, which is very important because most nurses give excellent care. We want to make sure that all of them can give that care, that they have the right support and training to do so.
Dr. Festing, thank you very much.
Thank you.
3 women who developed cancer after being wrongly given the all-clear following cervical screening tests have gone to court in their fight for compensation. The women are suing the Kent and Canterbury Hospital, where 90,000 test results had to be reviewed after mistakes were found in the analysis of cervical smears.
It's the first time victims of cervical screening failures have gone to court for compensation. 2 of the women flanking their solicitor required major surgery to stop cancer, which could have been avoided if abnormalities in their routine smear tests had been picked up.
I feel very strongly. I mean, I did everything that I was supposed to do. I went for my tests, as I was called for. I don't see as there's anything else I could have done.
The case follows Britain's biggest ever smear test scandal 3 years ago at the Kent and Canterbury Hospital. 8 women died and dozens needed surgery. The hospital trust has paid compensation to 45 women, but argues it's not to blame for all the abnormalities missed. The case centres on the level of accuracy expected from laboratory screeners and will set for the first time what is a reasonable margin of error.
Well, there have been many blunders publicised about cervical screening failing over the years, but this is the first time that women have actually got to court in disputing whether or not their cervical screening tests were misreported, and it is crucial because thus far no standard has been set of what we can expect of cervical screening, so it's going to be a landmark test.
The hearing, due to last all week, will decide whether East Kent Health Authority is liable for negligence. But it will also set out for the first time the standards all women can expect from cervical screening. James Westhead, BBC News at Canterbury Law Courts.
Negotiators in Yemen are trying to make contact with the armed tribesmen who've kidnapped 2 British aid workers and a Dutch family of 4. They were seized yesterday as they drove from Sadr in the north to the capital, Sana'a. 2 of their cars were abandoned by the roadside, but the third, a 4-wheel drive vehicle, is still missing. The 2 Britons and the Dutchman were working for an American medical aid organisation in Yemen. The Foreign Office says the Yemeni government has agreed not to use force to try to secure their release. England's rugby team is in serious danger of being expelled from this season's 5 Nations Championship. The Rugby Football Union have been given until midday to confirm that they still supported a contract covering the distribution of television revenue. Our sports correspondent Neil Bennett is at the headquarters of English Rugby Union.
Well, Justin, the deadline has passed without much apparently changing. It is in fact 2 years since England were last in this position, threatened with expulsion from the 5 Nations Championship. And the problem now is exactly the same as it was then. The deal, which England negotiated unilaterally with Sky to televise their home international matches here at Twickenham. England last won the 5 Nations in 1995 and see themselves, along with France, as the big pulling powers as far as sponsors and television viewers are concerned. That led them to negotiate their own TV deal with Sky B, worth £87 million over 5 years. But that angered the other home countries and threatened the whole future of the competition, which started in 1910 when France began to take part. Since then, it's been the highlight of the rugby calendar. Despite their recent success, England don't have the best 5 Nations record. That honour belongs to Wales. Scotland are England's oldest international opponents, but they, like Ireland, are struggling in the professional era and have looked on enviously at the money being spent on the game in England.
Neil, the deadline has come and gone. We've still not heard anything. When are we going to?
Well, I think faxes have been exchanged during the morning, and we certainly are expecting to hear something this afternoon. The problem is, of course, the distribution of television money from that 96 deal. Now, it was the understanding of the other countries that England would share out some of the TV proceeds with them, but England have not done that. They've not been even been able to agree on an independent assessor to decide on how much money should be shared out. So I think basically the other countries have just got fed up waiting for their money.
At the end of the day, though, it's in everyone's interest, indeed in their financial interest, isn't it, that England stay in the competition, and one sort of feels that somehow, somewhere along the line, a compromise might be found.
Oh, I think there will be some sort of compromise. They did step back from the brink 2 years ago, and I think that's what will happen this time. Ironically, the money that the other countries are claiming from England is about £10 million over the past 2 years, and that's exactly the sum that England stand to lose if they're kicked out of the 5 Nations Championship. So obviously it's in everybody's interest that this problem should be settled.
Neil Bennett, Twickenham, thank you very much. Residents of the Catholic Garvaghy Road in Portadown are meeting the Prime Minister in Downing Street this afternoon in an attempt to reach a compromise over the Orange Order's annual march through the town. The meeting comes after 6 months of stalemate and tension. Our Ireland correspondent Tom Coulter spent a day in Portadown finding out what the locals think about the dispute.
Shoppers go about their business under the watchful eye of the security forces. Even by Northern Ireland standards, it's not normal to have this number of police and troops on the streets. But this is not just any town, this is Portadown. Sectarian division and tension here has been heightened to such a degree that the security forces must be prepared for trouble. As the Prime Minister himself put it, the continuing dispute over the Drumcree parade is poisoning community relations.
We really need to sort it out because they're just losing patience. I think where both sides, people are losing patience, and a lot of the MPs and what have you, I mean, obviously they're speaking for the people, but at the same time, I think there's an awful lot of the people would like to see an agreement of some sort, so we can all get back to a bit of normality.
Do you think the Prime Minister's own personal involvement might be helpful?
It might and might not.
The area around this country church has become the focal point of loyalist protest. To members of the Orange Order, being blocked from marching their traditional route from Drumcree is an erosion of the religious and civil liberties. For 6 months in all kinds of weather, the Orange men have maintained a presence here at Drumcree Hill, and there doesn't appear to be any weakening in their resolve that they have the right to walk down the Catholic Garvaghy Road. The flag of the Irish Republic flies over that disputed stretch of road. The residents remain adamant that the only way to resolve the problem is for the Orange Order to meet them in face-to-face talks.
At the end of the day, Tony Blair can't sit on Downing Street and deliver anything here. It's really up to the people of the area.
It should be discussed locally. You know, if the Orange men sit down and talk to the residents.
And you think that's the only way a solution can be found?
Yeah, face-to-face talks.
This is the most controversial stretch of road in the British Isles. The dispute surrounding it has been ongoing since 1995, with no sign of the Orange Order or the residents reaching an accommodation. It remains to be seen if the Prime Minister's personal involvement can break that deadlock. Tom Coulter, BBC News on the Garvaki Road.
And that's all this Monday lunchtime from the 1 o'clock news. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. More wet and windy weather to start the week. At the moment on the radar we've got some lovely colours coming in from the west, indicating some very heavy bursts of rain indeed. And that's not good news if you live on the River Severn, because at the moment in the Ironbridge Gorge area the river is on red alert, that's flood alert, and a little bit further to the south as well on the Severn between Upper Arley and Beverley. There's a lot of water around, so do listen out to your local radio stations for updates on that. Now, along with the heavy rain will come some winds, but as you can see here, there's a little bit of yellow in these southwesterly winds, indicating some fairly mild air pushing across the country through the next 24 hours. There are the gusts ahead of this weather system. We've had them in the range of 40 to 60 miles an hour through the morning across some of the more exposed hills and headlands. The wet and windy weather will extend eastwards through the afternoon. Brighter skies, but also some blustery showers coming in across western parts of the British Isles, and by then I think probably the strongest gusts will have moved up into northeastern parts of England and Scotland, but still some pretty strong gusts across southeastern parts of England driving that rain through. So the mild air coming in from the southwest, and their temperatures could just about get into double figures, up to around about 10 Celsius. The mild air in evidence overnight in the south, a little bit colder the further north you happen to go. Now today's wet weather will move out of the way overnight, but then another weather system will clump the showers together across northwestern areas, and it'll also pull this weather front back up from the south. So that means more rain across England and Wales during Tuesday. The showers clumping together for a time across Northern Ireland and Scotland, but later on the blustery showers returning, and you can see temperatures of 10, perhaps even as far north as Glasgow by Tuesday afternoon. As we go through the middle part of the week, the weather systems move away, but still the chance of some cloud and rain in the southeast and some showers further north across the British Isles. That's the forecast. Bye for now.
Nearly 5 years after the death of apartheid, I've come back to South Africa to try to find out how much life has changed for the black majority. Back then I met Cynthia Mtebe, a mother who lived in a makeshift tent with her children. She didn't even have one of these tin shacks. I'm here to find Cynthia and to see what's happened to her and the thousands like her who lived on the margins of existence looking for the promised land.
Panorama, tonight at 10 on BBC One.
Jude!
What a surprise.
No, it isn't. You knew I'd be here. You've been watching me all the time.
I've always noticed something extraordinary between the two of you. I kept telling myself it was because you were cousins, but it's more than that.
It's going to be like this everywhere we go. As soon as people find out we're not married.
We move on. We'll move somewhere where nobody knows us. If they find out, we'll move on again. As long as it takes for the world to change. Sometimes I think you're one person split in two.
Jude, Thursday at 9:30 on BBC One.
Now on BBC One, your news from across the West.
From the News West team this lunchtime, good afternoon. An osteopath from Bristol has appeared in court accused of indecently assaulting a woman patient. Julian Midder is denying the charge.
Julian Midder arrived at Bristol Magistrates Court accused of indecently assaulting a woman patient at his Brislington surgery on August the 4th last year. On leaving court, Mr Midder claimed he was being victimised.
This is now the CPS acting in a malicious and spiteful way. They're following up a complaint that has no basis, but they're prepared to pursue it no matter how inconsistent or flimsy the evidence.
Mr Midder says he'll plead not guilty to the charge of indecent assault. He was remanded on conditional bail to appear again on February the 2nd. Stephen Lamb, BBC News West, Bristol Magistrates Court.
If you can't stop smoking, at least stop smoking in front of your children. That's the call today from a group of health specialists from across the West. They say that tobacco smoke gives children chest infections, ear problems, and even increases the risk of cot death.
This is baby Hiscott, born only yesterday and still without a name of his own. But Mum Claire has already ruled that the area around her newborn son will be a smoke-free zone.
Smoking is something that can cause cot death, which one would like to avoid. And just because I want him to breathe clean air from day one, really.
From today, the parents of every child born in the West will be given a card to put up at home, asking family and friends not to smoke around the child.
It's important because babies breathe more rapidly, and unlike us, if we see someone smoking and we can move away, babies can't do that. They are dependent on their carers to provide these smoke-free zones.
A third of mothers still smoke, but when a similar campaign was tried in Yorkshire, 1 in 10 of them gave up. There are high hopes of similar success here. Kevin Budden, BBC News West.
The last Sea Harrier jump jet to be built has staged a fly-past in Bristol this morning. The crew of a Sea Harrier flew over the Ministry of Defence Centre at Abbey Wood at 11 o'clock. They were paying their respects to the procurement executive who commissioned the last of the fighter bombers for the Royal Navy. Officials watched the jet pass on its way to RAFs at Athen in Wales. The Wiltshire peer Lord Bath is being forced to cut around a dozen jobs on his estate at Longleat. The workers are employed in his forestry department, which has been hit by reductions in the price of timber. The business will continue trading, however, and those renting houses on the estate will be allowed to stay. Bath has won a national award for the way it copes with the environmental impact of tourism. The city attracts around 2 million visitors every year. Bath and North East District Council has, with the help of local businesses, implemented measures to lessen their negative impact. They include encouraging firms who rely on tourism to use green cleaning products. The council was one of 9 in the country to be given £5,000 for its efforts by a power company, National Grid. On to sport now. Bristol Rovers produced their biggest away win in 16 years, beating Reading by 6 goals. With that and the rest of the region's sporting action, here's John Kay.
After a quiet first half, Holloway set up a goal for Jamie Curitin and Rovers were on a roll. 7 minutes later, Curitin scored from a penalty, and a few minutes after that netted a third and then a fourth, Curitin's 16th of the season. The goal scorer turned goal maker, setting one up for Roberts, who squeezed through the Reading defence. And not to be outdone, Roberts then got number 6 for Rovers, just seconds before the end of the match. The fans went mad, 6 goals in 30 minutes and away from home as well. It looked like being an even better day for Rovers fans. Bristol City were losing at home to Tranmere. City, though, came back and equalised with a goal from Scott Murray. 1-1, taking them out of the relegation zone for the first time in 9 weeks.
We're not losing games at the moment, and that's something that can only be a positive, really, for the manager and everybody involved.
Swindon were away to Port Vale in the frozen north. Atrocious conditions making it a difficult game. But Town managed the goal in the 9th minute. George Nadar beating keeper Paul Musselwhite. Final score Vale 0, Swindon 1. And more celebrations at Forest Green Rovers, who've made it into the 4th round of the FA Umbro Trophy for the first time in their history. Man of the match had to be Alex Sykes, who scored a hat-trick against Witney Town. Final score Rovers 4, Witney 0. In rugby, Bristol beat Wakefield 35-19, but it was a less than sparkling performance. The Yorkshire side were ahead for much of the game, although Bristol eventually won through when scrum half Gareth Baber dived over the line. Speculation about Bristol's future and that possible purchase of London Scottish mean things feel less than secure at the Memorial Stadium, but all that might change this week. Owner Malcolm Pearce says the terms of the amalgamation will be announced on Wednesday. Bath, meanwhile, beat Newcastle 16-11 on Saturday, the first time they've beaten the Falcons in 2 years, Mike Catt leading the attack. But today the talk at the Rec is off the pitch. Jack Rowell, who built up the club during the 80s and 90s, is rumoured to be coming back as the new chief executive. The club says, though, he's just one of the names being considered. Gloucester saw several decisions go against them in their game against Richmond, not least when Chris Fortey's touchdown beneath a pile of forwards was disallowed by referee Nigel Yates. That would have given Gloucester the match, but Richard Hill's men had to make do with a draw, 24-all.
John Kay ending that report there. The future of Speedway in Wiltshire is on the line today. Swindon Robins bosses want to drop into the sport's second division because they say they can't afford to pay the going rate for riders in the top league. But the British Speedway Promoters Association isn't keen. It believes the elite league will suffer by the loss of one of its teams. Now, he was perhaps Bristol's most famous son, but the city has never officially commemorated him. Now, on the anniversary of Cary Grant's 95th birthday, a campaign has been launched for a statue to the man who'll always be known as Archie Leach to the Bristolians. Kirsty Young reports.
He was a Hollywood great, and his rise from working-class obscurity to superstardom was the stuff films are made of. Along the way, he never forgot his roots and the city where he was born, even if Bristol hasn't fully shown its appreciation of him. The greatest recognition there's been in the city was this plaque unveiled at his old school 2 years ago. Now, on what would have been his 95th birthday, some are trying to remedy that lapse. £50,000 needs to be raised for the statue, which will be part of the newly revamped centre. There were calls for a statue when Cary Grant died 13 years ago. This time, his fans and admirers are more hopeful of success. Kirsty Gardner, BBC News West.
Always guaranteed to get the heart fluttering there. Tony Target at the weather map now.
Thank you very much, Susan. Yes, it's a very wet picture, I'm afraid, and a rather breezy one too. Further bursts of rain today. The temperature's about 9 at best. That's about 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The rain, I think, will gradually ease down towards dusk. So tonight it'll become dry for a time, and then the rain returning, particularly near the coasts and nearby hills, later in the night. The wind's freshening once again, so the temperatures are hardly likely to fall below 7 or 8. That's about 45, 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, well, again, further bursts of rain coming in quite quickly, becoming fairly persistent, and there may well be some heavier bursts around too, and still quite breezy. But it will be a very mild day everywhere. The temperatures up to 11 or 12, the low 50s Fahrenheit. Another wet day, I'm afraid. But on Wednesday, it will brighten up a little bit, become brighter with some sunshine, but again with a few showers. But wrap up well tomorrow.
Thank you, Tony. Of course, Tony is back with the rest of the team tonight at 6:30 for our main programme. Do join us then. I shall be back with our sign bulletin in about an hour's time over on BBC Two. Until then, for all of the team, bye for now.
This Saturday, things get a little sticky for Nikki.
She's our head rep.
I missed you so much.
And he's the manager of one of our most important hotels.
I never meant to hurt you.
If they were to get it on, she'd get the sack.
Sunburn, Saturday 5 to 9 on BBC One.
The locals are friendly.
Can you show me where your points are?
Famous.
Everyone knew me round here. I'd walk into you, Rhinal, and heads would turn.
Fun.
Some of you, like Ross here, will want to follow in your father's footsteps, but you can't sign on forever.
But just a bit frightening.
Go!
The League of Gentlemen.
Edward! Don't worry, Tubbs. They won't get far.
Tonight at 9:30 on BBC Two.
A prisoner about to be paroled dies in mysterious circumstances. Does someone want him to stay behind bars, or are there more sinister reasons? Ironside investigates in 25 minutes. Toadie is about to face the music first on BBC One for the last time.
Wildlife on One next week examines the struggle for survival of nature's great athlete, the cheetah, at 8:30 next Monday on BBC One.
So what have you got? Salim Patel worked on an oil platform, catering side. Clive surmises the body had been in the sea for about 3 days or so.
Does Clive surmise that our lad was dead before he went for his swim?
Well, he came across some odd-looking indentations about the base of the skull. In our humble opinion, Sergeant, we think it points to something a little more serious.
Spender, tomorrow at 9:30 on One.
In BBC Two's film shortly, 2 Australian sheep shearers battle it out for the position of top man, Sunday Too Far Away. In half an hour on BBC One, a special extended edition of Panorama on the prospects of war in the Gulf, including an interview with the American Defence Secretary Dick Cheney. Now it's time for the 9 o'clock news with Michael Burke.